Hey, you're listening to On Composition, a dance filmmaking podcast where we dig deeper into the moves and scenes we love. I'm Celine Kiner, DF's editorial director, and today we're talking with director, producer, dancer, DP, editor extraordinaire, Sarah Butler about her first film, a film she recorded on a farm in rural Wisconsin without even knowing it. Let's get started.
My name is Sarah, and I made a film. I wasn't planning to make a film, but I made a film that I called To the Bones of This Home when it was in 2021 when I was in residency for 6 months on a farm in rural Wisconsin. So I hope that this can help kind of give context in life, as you mentioned, but something about what I made, I also feel like there is something about it that I think speaks for itself a bit because there is text and there's a lot of space in it. I just rewatched it again and it was interesting to see after time away. But yeah, I made it by myself just on my phone. And as I said, I wasn't planning on making a film. So if looking at it now, I wonder if I were to make it again, and if I was going into it with the intention of creating a dance film, I wonder how much of it would be different and if that would help or not, but it was a really natural process. So I guess it feels silly for me to list the roles because it's just any of the roles I was
In all.
writing and narrating, and I'm in it and I edited it, and I guess I'm not sure if directing or producing is really applicable because it was just me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that means you're the director and the producer, but I guess
Sure.
my personal lens on it. Okay, so um the process of this film that you're describing, you take several visits to this home as it's being built. And to me, I think they took place over a longer period of time than your typical dance film shoot, just with my experience of like what happens in LA, which is a very abbreviated timeline, I guess. So I guess what was that process like, not knowing that you're gonna turn it into a film? When did you decide that it was going to be a film? Um, and as you're making like a very, very personal piece of work.
um, yeah, so as I mentioned, I was in a residency in rural Wisconsin. I think by the time I realized that I was making a film, I was maybe about 3 months in. So I think at some point towards the beginning of my time on this farm, I was going for a walk every morning, and then I was also going for walks in the evenings. And I would take the same. It was only one road, but I would take the same walk each day, and in the evenings as well. And yeah, it just became my morning ritual where I would wake up with the sun and go for a walk for an hour or two and then come back, and then we'd be working in the garden. So I think probably it's filmed over the course of between 2 to 3 months. And what was that process like? I mean, for me, also watching it back now, there's so much, maybe to a fault, there's so much patience in it. I can tell that I was living on a farm and like there's a lot of space, and a lot of just, yeah, a lot of space. Um, and yeah, so I think my process with it was incredibly patient. I was going for my walks and noticing the trees, noticing how the trees were changing, seeing this house be a little bit different each day, seeing it be a little bit different each night. And yeah, at some point, I think I generally went walking without my phone, but for some reason I had it with me at one point. And yeah, it was the time that I didn't see a construction crew there, so I was like feeling a little curious and mischievous, and went inside, and it was like, this is a really interesting space to be in. So I just set up leaned my phone against like a dirty corner, and was just sort of behaving in this building and kind of living in there. So yeah, I would go each day and spend time dancing and singing and just sort of living in this house as it was changing. So uh, and then when did I realize that I was making a film? Because it was an artist residency program. I was actually managing the program, so I was staying for the full season. But the first round of artists were coming to an end, and we decided to do a final sort of showing of what people had been up to. And I had a moment where I realized I didn't have anything to share. And I was like, well, I've been up to things, but I just haven't sort of compiled them in a way that's shareable. Um, and so, yeah, I sat down and was like, okay, well, what if I take some of this footage from the house? And then, yeah, I was doing a lot of writing in my time there in Wisconsin. And so I had written a long letter to a friend, um, speaking about this house and also a house down the way that was being torn down. Um, and sort of this experience between the two that is just something I was feeling about it. So then I was like, what if I record myself reading that letter, because it feels like there's a big overlap obviously with the footage. And then it was just became a way to share what I had been up to. And then when I showed it, people were like, oh, you made a film. And I was like, I guess I did. So yeah.
Was that the final iteration of the piece, or did you like continue to work on it after that showing?
I think I did go after that showing, I did go back and continue to film more. So I think I added a couple things that or replaced things, because that's part of what was interesting about it too for me, was that um, because the house was pretty noticeably changing each day, um, it wasn't like, oh, I can go back and get footage from when there was no roof. It was like, oh, I only have what I got then when I didn't know I was making something. And so then I went back after showing it with the intention of trying to sort of get similar shots that showed the progression of the build. And then I couldn't go in anymore because the
Yeah.
doors went in. So yeah.
Because this piece doesn't have music, and the score is essentially your text, and you're narrating the letter that you wrote. And then the ambient sounds of the outdoors. There's like a rain sound and maybe something else. Um, was music ever part of your process when you would go in or when you were editing? Did you think about it? Was it a conscious choice, or did it just feel as though it didn't need it?
Um, uh, I think there was maybe a point when I was editing it that just as an experiment, I also part of my residency, I had been composing and recording a cappella harmonies and things. So, because I love singing also. So I think there was a curious part of me at some point while editing that was like, I wonder if music could also live in this. But it didn't seem to make any sense. I mean, because every time that I was at the house and going for my walks, I mean, there was so much, I mean, I hesitate to say silence because there's always it's kind of this like the music of what is. But yeah, I'll use silence because it's easy. But yeah, I think a big part of going for the walks was not like in how to say this, like I feel like the only sound that I was adding to the experience was like the sound of my feet walking. And if I was dancing in the house, I was improvising in silence. And so it didn't seem like I don't know that music ever made sense for me in it. I think I did entertain the idea for maybe like 3 minutes once, and I was like, no. Because also as soon as I put in I think there's already like a bit of a melancholy tone to the film, and I think as soon as there's music added, it also becomes kind of this like dramatic
Mm-hmm.
thing that it's not that's just not really a part of it. So yeah.
Totally. I know you don't live in Wisconsin anymore, but do you still visit the house? Have you visited the house, I guess? Um, or been inside since?
um so I made the film in 2021. At some point in 2021 I couldn't go in anymore, and I'm not sure exactly when people moved in or when the people who were building it moved in. um but I did go back to Wisconsin to work for the same group uh, last year in 2022. So I would go on my walks and I would admire the house from the road and felt a camaraderie. But no, I mean, I don't plan on knocking on their door and being like, can I dance in your house? Like I think like there's also that also feels very much a part of it is like there's I mean, I know you mentioned this before about like the inevitable loss that comes with growth. I can't remember the exact phrasing that I had used, but um, yeah, it's like at some point it's someone else's. I mean, it's someone else's house the whole time, but like at some point I won't be able to go in anymore, and that's a part of it. Um, you
And the
know,
and the future of it was always like known.
yeah, yeah, and it's I don't know, it's almost like a really beautiful relationship that you have with someone, and then it you know like sort of disintegrates in the way that it does, and you see them and you enjoy seeing them or you don't, or but things are different now, so yeah, it does feel like I don't think I had a romantic relationship with the house, but I do feel very much like I have a, a relationship with that structure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it came to a natural conclusion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so as you mentioned that phrase in the description of the film, the inevitable loss that comes with growth, that really sat with me. And I guess I'm wondering if that feeling is something that the making of this film taught you, something that you were already feeling as you were entering that process that kind of came out through that experience, and how making it shifted your perspective on that.
um yeah, I think it was definitely something that was already brewing, which is why it sort of came up in the way that it did. Um, I mean, I think it's a hard question to answer. Um, I mean, I think definitely spending time living and working on this farm was there was a lot of time spent by myself. And a lot of time, yeah, so something about in the mornings walking by myself and having that practice and working in the garden every morning. I think I had really wanted to have this relationship, which I didn't completely have because I wasn't sprouting the seeds, but I really was interested in having this relationship with the farm where you plant the seeds and over time, you're taking care of them and you're tending to them and you're cultivating and you're weeding and you're having that process and you're aiding in their growth. And then you're harvesting and then you're cooking and then you're making the food for people and then you're also like seeing it become compost and seeing the seeds spread and kind of this, like I think so often this is a big generalization, but like in Western culture, there's such a like linear timeline around things. And I think working at this farm had this sort of cyclical or like sort of spiral. I was just sort of accessing a different relationship with growth and death and how death was just supporting new life and
Mm.
you probably an experience that a lot of people have when they're spending more time in nature. But yeah, I think I don't know how to answer the question directly. I wish I did. I
A bit of a mystery. No, I think that you did in the way that makes the most sense for your experience, and that's the most important.
sure. I mean, I guess it's just also like because I mentioned before, like I think there's definitely like a like a uh, hint of melancholy that sort of exists as a layer in the film, which also feels related to nostalgia. And I feel like nostalgia is this thing that I think most everybody can relate to or have some experience with. And same with melancholy of kind of this things leaving you, things, um, something that you thought you knew, like, everything's changing all the time, everything's moving all the time. And that's really beautiful, but it can also feel really hard. It can feel really challenging.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the last question, kind of following up on that, is did the making of this film or the unknowing process of making this piece, did it change your filmmaking or dance practices in any way?
Um, it's an interesting question. I have one other film series that I haven't publicly shared, but other than that, I haven't. This is the only film, especially in this kind of narrative format, that I've made. Um, and so, in that way, yes. In that way, yes, it has influenced my filmmaking process because it has sort of sparked it. And it's given some ground where like then I don't know when the next thing that I'll make will be. I'm sure I'll make something uh when the time is right. But yeah, I can't say that, oh, this film was different than my other film because I don't have another film. Um and so yeah, similar answer for my movement practices. I mean, it's hard for me to pinpoint like making this film changed how I invest in movement in this, and this way. I mean, I have been dancing since I was like before I can remember. And like most of my professional experience has been in dance, and I'm still dancing. So a lot of the time it's like harder to notice how things influence it because there's just so much information. But I think that definitely um, being spending time in that residency program. I mean, I mentioned patience before. I think I would say something in like making this film and spending time. on the farm, there was, I think it did help shift, which is a note I should be taking again now. So it's good reminder. Um, the relationship with process, like my relationship with process, without knowing, or like finding value in process without knowing exactly where something's going. Because I think also you mentioned specifically creating films. I think you used specifically LA, but I think it exists everywhere. Like we have such for good reason, we have such a like product driven mentality. Again, big generalization, but I think there's a big product driven um, situation that we're all in. And I think it was a pretty beautiful experience to end up making a film and be surprised and to not know, to know that it was like I'm investing in something that feels meaningful for me. And it's a big gift and privilege to be able to be in the position to do that, to have the time and the space to feel lost and to just like listen to something that feels like it's stirring something, and to give that the time and the space to like get, it's like a baby giraffe. It's like to give it the time and space to kind of like get its legs. And it was like, I could never have predicted that this is what it would become. Um, and I had a really beautiful and challenging experience doing it and feel like I grew inside of that. So yeah, process and how that's related to product, I would say.
Beautiful.